ACLS. And I have here today Mohammed, a Syrian journalist, who's written a brilliant article. Mohammed, thank you so much for being here with me today.
Thank you.
I want to jump right into it. You've written this article and you published it in Daraj, and it's called Iran's Weaponization of the Quran Burning in Sweden. You sent it to me, you shared it with me on Twitter. And I straight away, I mean, it really kind of got my attention. As you know, I'm an expert on Iran, and of course, anything that is related to the Islamic Republic, I want to know about and I want to read about. And I found your article extremely, extremely interesting. You put the finger on something that I have talked about, researched about, and wrote about for at least 2 years now. And that is how the Islamic Republic of Iran is playing our democratic institutions and principles, and also weaponizing free speech. And I believe, and you may disagree or not with me, it has preventing Western capitals from acting against the Islamic Republic and actually calling out some of its manipulation. So if you could summarize the article for our listeners, and I'm going to publish the article because I really want people to read this. It's excellent. It's really well written, very well presented. So I'm going to give the floor to you. If you could tell me a little bit about, what's in the article, what prompted you to write about it, and also in your line of work, why did you start paying attention to the Islamic Republic of Iran?
Thank you very much for hosting me. Thank you also for reading the article. It's a pleasure that someone like you who's an expert is reading what I have written. The thing is, I'm interested in Iran mainly because Iran is occupying my country, and Iran has been occupying my country since a long, long time. At least it has been intervening in my country since 1979. But the balanced intervention in my country came just in 2011. It was clear to everyone that Iran is militarily intervening in my country. However, even before that, I met Assad twice himself, and I didn't interview him, but I saw him twice. Once I saw him with Ahmadinejad, and the body language told me a lot about how this man is subject to lots of kind of blackmail. I'm not saying he's good or bad, but I'm saying he is in front of the Iranians. To me, he looked extremely weak. I saw him with another European president. He sounded more comfortable, but with Ahmadinejad, to me, he looked, I don't know, I can't describe it, but it was really not a good feeling. Mm-hmm. It felt like he is kind of brainwashed or happy with this gang of people.
Subservient comes to mind. I'm sorry to cut you off, but I have to agree with you. Interestingly enough, I remember a conversation that I had with a certain general, Soleimani, it was in Iraq, and I remember him, speaking about Syria and the way that Iran cracked into Syria, and that they essentially broke, al-Assad. And again, I'm not passing judgment on whether or not he's a good president. It's beside the point. The point is they brought him to kneel before Tehran because he didn't have a choice. It was either this, or he was going to have his head chopped off, if I can put it that way. And I think there's something quite nefarious about this. And also, I think that Syria is a cautionary tale in terms of how the kind of behavior and the agenda that Iran has in terms of, it's not invading a country per se with boots on the ground, although in Syria, you could argue that it's different. It's about the way that they're forcing the leadership of this country to kneel to Iran and to acquiesce to whatever wishes Tehran has on that particular country against, a lot of the time the wishes of the leadership, and also the best interest of the people they meant to serve. And again, whether or not this leadership happens to be legitimate or not is not the point. It's a violation of that country's national sovereignty.
I totally agree. So on the personal level, I was worried since the first time I saw Assad with Ahmadinejad in person. I was really worried that this country or this regime in Iran will not end well. So that was what caught my attention first. Later on, I went to Sayyidah Zainab, and I was working back in Syria in a magazine back in Syria, and I wrote about Sayyidah Zainab, about I forgot what that was, the Muharram thing, Ashura.
Yes. Okay.
And I received lots of criticism, even though I did not mention Iran at all. I did not even say the word Iran in the whole article, more than 1,000 words. I did not say Iran at all. I was thinking, to be frank, about that, but because I saw lots of Iraqi, pro-Iranian, pro-Hezbollah religious leaders there. Mm-hmm. And they were speaking about Ashura and about Shia Islam in Syria as if it is the religion of the country, the religion of the president, the religion of the majority. Later on, I got criticized, or let us say the editor-in-chief got so much criticized because he published the article, and then I understood that writing not about Iran, but just like referring to Iran in a very metaphorical way will be harshly criticized by the regime. And that was before 2011. So after 2011, it will be a very big no-no.
Wow. Mm-hmm. So hang on a second, because I became, and I apologize for my ignorance.
Sure.
But I became aware of, the RSGC presence in Syria, on the back of the Arab Spring, when Assad was really teetering on the edge and about to lose, control of Syria. I didn't realize that the RSGC, I knew that, through Hezbollah, and Syria has had, a very kind of tenuous relationship with Hezbollah. Syria came to the aid of Lebanon way back when. And I know there was tensions there, but I wasn't aware that the RSGC was actually operating in Syria, at least in a way that was strong enough that you would not be able to speak about religious issues relating to Shia Islam in Syria freely. That's interesting.
It's an experience that I had, and it was indeed scary to me, even though my editor-in-chief was strong enough and the owner of the magazine I was working at was an influential person, so I was kind of protected. However, I felt it was very sensitive. I think Iran was before 2011 was not on the popular level, was not was not discussed or was not mentioned on the popular level. I think it is because of the language. Someone like Nasrallah speaks Arabic, very good Arabic. Mm-hmm. He's very
eloquent.
Yes, that's the word. Thank you. And he is. He looked to everyone like a very realistic person. And after 2006, with during the war between Hezbollah and Israel, he got so much attention and so much popularity in Syria, in wedding parties in the countryside.
Really?
In the city. Yes, the pictures of Hassan Nasrallah were put next to the pictures of Bashar al-Assad and Ahmadinejad on the buses in Damascus and in Damascus countryside. Speaking to anyone from any religious background, they will speak highly of Hassan Nasrallah as a modest person, as an interesting person, as a strong person. And it showed to me, or it proved to me, that the Syrian people in general are not sectarian. I'm talking again about the majority. I'm talking again about the popular level. Not sectarian, however, very easily fooled and very easily brainwashed and very easily can be subject to propaganda and can believe what is said to them. So we destroyed Israel in 2000. We won the war in 2006. Okay, let us calculate that on with a paper and a pen, and see which country was destroyed and how many victims were killed on both sides. That was not a place to discuss. So, as I said, it's the problem with Iran, and at the same time with Israel. Israel was not reaching out because Israel is not speaking the language the other side is speaking.
Well, I mean, 20% of Israel's population are Arab Israeli. So Arabic is definitely a language that is spoken in Israel. But yes, I agree that because there's no real ties between Syria and Israel for many reasons. I think there's a lack of communication. And that could lead to a lack of understanding, and I think that it's I wouldn't say a mistake, but it's a sad reality, because I think that we have more in common than we think, and we're actually facing a common enemy, and also I think that just the way that Iran is weaponizing free speech in Europe, I think that Iran has weaponized the issue of Palestinians, and unfortunately, Palestinians are actually suffering. I mean, they're the one, in my mind, suffering the most of this conflict, this internal conflict with Israel, because certain group like the PFLP or Hamas or whoever it is for that matter, I don't think they're very interested in finding solutions that would benefit Palestinians on the ground. They're more interested in selling a particular propaganda and a narrative that is beneficial to them in terms of monetary benefits. They're not trying to solve issues with water management, for example, or access to health, or things like this. They're quite happy to utilize funds and direct them to buying weapons rather than feed their people, which is, for me, is a tragedy. Palestinians, have been done a great injustice, and it's something that countries across the region, keep claiming to want to defend the Palestinian cause, but I don't see them enabling positive dialogue, or at least setting the ground for, some kind of a peace agreement or the creation. I don't know. It doesn't matter what it is, but they're not working towards a peaceful resolution of the problem. And I don't understand why. I mean, I do understand why, because it's a very hot political issue and it could be weaponized in many ways, and it serves everyone but the Palestinians. And for me, it's a great injustice. I mean, they deserve to live in peace. They deserve to have a future like everybody else. And to revert and use sectarianism to justify hatred, for me, is a ridiculous position.
I totally agree. Later on, when I left my country for security reasons, being a journalist, I fled to Europe, and I started looking into the challenges in front of Syrians, or facing Syrians in the West. And in my opinion, one of the biggest challenges for us is political Islam. Speaking of the Muslim Brotherhood, speaking of Iran, speaking of Hezbollah infiltrating the West with their propaganda, or with their businesses, or with I saw lots of Iranians here who are against the Iranian regime, and I did not imagine that it was that terrible and that horrible, and that it has been for a long time while the Iranians were suffering under such a regime, and until the issue of the burning of the Quran came into discussion, when Silwan Momika, the Iraqi militiaman who burned the Quran in Sweden, came into the light.
Tell me about this, because I mean, it's been publicized. It's on social media. It's everywhere. Everyone has an opinion about it. Can you give me some context as to what groups were involved, the kind of discussion, because you covered the issue, the kind of discussion that happened around this, and how eventually how did Iran, played this? Because I really feel. And I'm maybe a bit paranoid, and it might sound a bit conspirational, but I can't help but think that it was set up, because I know for a fact, and we know this to be true, and researchers can confirm that Iran very often loves to sponsor, and I'm talking financially, groups that are diametrically opposed to its agenda, but it enable them to justify, to counter-justify the narrative. And by this, I mean, for example, Iran has funded far-right extremism in Europe because, far-right extremism are obviously, very Islamophobic as well as being very anti-Semitic. And so when they commit acts of violence against Muslims, whether it's on, it's verbal or, they enact acts of violence, desecrating cemeteries or whatever it is, then Iran can turn around and say, look at Europe, we have a clash of civilization. We have this, religious war that is going on, and we have to defend our people. It really kind of plays into this, this notion of jihad and the need that people have to rally around the regime in Iran. So I want you to kind of set the tone for me and tell me, do you think that it would be possible for Iran to have literally set up Sweden and actually engage in certain sponsorship of certain groups and people, so that that would happen, burning the Quran, and how they could then weaponize this and actually advance their agenda, not just in Sweden, but the whole of Europe?
I don't have an information, but knowing the pattern Iran behaves according to is, I can agree, or I think it might be true. And I'm sure that Swedes are aware of that. They have done that in Syria. From the very beginning, they said they created a problem. People were protesting for their own rights. Children were tortured and so on. And then the Iranians just immediately intervened. The people in Daraa, from the very beginning, said that there are Iranian fighters in Daraa, from the very first few months. So the method of creating a problem and then being the only one to solve the problem or monopolizing the solution for the problem, in my opinion, is a tool for Iran. They said that we intervened in Syria in order to protect the holy shrines in Sayyidah Zainab. When were those shrines threatened by anybody?
Never. Yeah. And it's ridiculous to make that statement, because obviously, the shrine has been there for quite some time, say several centuries, and no group, whether Christian, Jews, Shia Muslim, Sunni Muslim, would even think of desecrating a holy place. Even it might not be their holy place, but I think there's a very strong sense across the Middle East, that holy places are holy places, and a lot of the time, we share them anyway, because we have the same prophets. I mean, for the most part. I think it's a ridiculous argument to say that this particular shrine was in danger, no more, than any other shrine, and by that I mean none at all, because except for certain lunatics who decided, for example, in Israel to target the certain shrines, it doesn't really happen, and it's always very political anyway. But I agree with you. I don't think that Lady Zainab's shrine was in any danger, other than the one that Iran kind of made up to justify. But I think it was a way to crack into Syria and justify the presence of RSGC and call for foreign fighters to join in, because you had people from, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think from Yemen that also kind of joined in this effort.
Indeed. And at the same time, as I said, they monopolize the solution for the problem they create. Later on, they started saying, well, we are in Syria because the Syrian government, the legal or the legitimate Syrian government, has invited us into Syria, which is ridiculous, all of it. Legal and legitimate. This is so ridiculous to say about Assad. The same applies to Sweden, and the same applies to Europe. I wouldn't be surprised if Iran is funding someone like Momika. I don't know the guy. I have been listening to the guy's interviews.
Who is he? Who is this guy?
Not so much information other than what has been written in the article has been clear to me. He came from northern Iraq. He is a Christian Iraqi, and he was part of the Al-Hashd al-Shabi. That is a militia or an umbrella of militias that is funded and supported by Iran and affiliated to Iran. Yeah, interesting. Very interesting. I mean, using the minorities for regimes like Iran and like the regime in Syria, using and even in Lebanon as well, saying that we protect the Christians or we protect the minorities for them, it is their favorite pretext to justify whatever they want to do.
I know, but do you know this? I take objection to this because what really pains me is that, the Islamic Republic has one language for outside its borders. So, for example, it will, like you said, present itself as the great defender of, Christians and other religious minorities. But at the same time, within Iran, because Iran has a huge Christian community, and then people tend to think that it's all Shia Muslim. It's not. You have Sunnis as well. You have Jews, very small minority, a few thousands, and you have Baha'is as well. Now, those minorities are being, oppressed and repressed to a degree that is never talked about because it's very uncomfortable, and the regime has a tendency and a propensity to shut down anyone who would even attempt to talk about it, trying to dismiss them, character assassination, to make sure that it never gets published, or that people, if they read it, would not take the writer seriously. And I take offense because I'm a strong advocate of freedom of religion. I think that people should be free to practice their faith in safety. It shouldn't bother anyone. People are entitled to believe what they wish, as long as they're not causing harm to society, and most of the time they don't anyway. But you see that, Iran pretend to want to defend freedom of religion and minorities, and then at home persecute them and, reduce their freedom of movement and prevent them from entering certain professions or to even go to university in some cases in Iran. I find it quite insulting. And also, for me, it's really assuming that people are so stupid that they will not, catch on to the hypocrisy of the language of the regime. So I'm sorry for diverging a little bit, but I just take offense to this, and the idea that people could even believe that Iran is interested in defending anybody other than themselves and their people is offensive.
I think sometimes I'm talking about the people inside Iran or inside Syria or inside Lebanon, for instance, or inside Yemen. Those who believe the Iranian propaganda are either brainwashed, and when you are brainwashed, you don't know you are brainwashed, or because they are scared, simply the same way I was worried, or I couldn't express my opinion in 2006 saying that what Hezbollah has done to what Hezbollah has done to Lebanon in the war is really, what is this, guys? You won a war, you destroyed Lebanon. So you couldn't say that in front of the people, or even the people you trust, because they were, to me, they believed in Hassan Nasrallah and they believed in Hezbollah. And even today, some people who are against Hezbollah and they believe that it's a terrorist militia. I'm talking about Syrians now. They still has an offense when you say Israel criticizes Hassan Nasrallah for 1, 2, 3, 4. It looks to them like, no, not Israel. Israel shouldn't say that. But if, for instance, Sweden says that, it's okay, or if Italy says that, it's fine, but not Israel, which to me is an ideological or a psychological problem. But back to Momika, the guy came to Sweden around 3 years ago. He is almost 40 years old, and he is, when I hear him talking in his interviews, to me he looks like someone who is focusing in just on one issue in his life, which is burning the Quran. It's like Rasmus Paludan, the Swedish Danish man or lawyer who has and politician who has been burning the Quran for since 2020 for just to get into the parliament. That is his program. So Momika's program.
That's it. That's just the whole program. It's just to ban the Quran. I mean, look, banning a book, I think, is just so ridiculous because you can't ban ideas, and that's what a book represents. It's a compilation of ideas. I mean, for me, to utilize free speech to do that and cancel essentially a program is a little bit ridiculous. And I think that he suffers from cognitive dissonance because you can't say that you stand for free speech and freedom of religion and in the same breath, advocate for the canceling of a book or a religion is ridiculous.
or fighting under the flag of Qasim Soleimani and Abu Majid al-Muhandis.
There's that too. Is that true? I mean, it's a little bit. It sounds like it's not just hypocritical, but for me, it sounds like someone was trying to fan tensions and willingly, because what's going to happen when you burn. First of all, I think psychologically in Europe, when you burn a book, people's mind go back to Nazi Germany, because they used to burn any forbidden book, and they had those great kind of gathering, and people were forced to witness the burning of certain books. I mean, this is where my mind goes when people talk about burning a book. So I have some kind of a visceral reaction to this. I think it's ridiculous. Also, I think it runs contrary to democratic values and principles, and also against logic and rationality. And I don't think that you achieve anything by doing that other than demonstrate hatred towards a particular demographic, and it's not solving a problem. So I can understand someone wanting to address Islamic radicalism, for example, but I don't think that criminalizing Islam and Muslims in general would actually help do that anyway. So I think it's a pointless exercise in hatred.
I totally agree. Just mentioning the Holocaust and what it means to a Western mind, what burning books means to a Western mind. It starts with burning books and it ends most of the time with the Jews, unfortunately. Mm-hmm. And that is why the community in Sweden, for instance, has been so much alert and so much they stood and they issued statements standing with the Muslim community in Sweden, because they know where it ends, and indeed it ends there. I remember in 2020, for instance, when Paludan started, Rasmus Paludan started burning the Quran. There were protests in a neighborhood in a city called Malmö in southern Sweden. Called the neighborhood is called Rosengård, mostly inhabited by immigrants. Mm-hmm. And there were riots, there were protests, and there were some policemen were injured. And the next day, I went to that area, and I saw someone has painted an Israeli flag on the ground. And the next day, I saw some videos speaking about the Jews in a very, as if they are behind Paludan and they have been paying Paludan to burn the Quran. Swedes didn't see that and didn't recognize that, because it is the videos were in Arabic. Well, it was on the ground, but the flag was too badly portrayed, or the painting was really bad, so you couldn't recognize it was an Israeli flag unless you would really look into it.
But this is interesting what you're saying, because I think of a lot of the time Western capital miss out on certain signs because they don't know how to read the Islamic Republic and the propaganda. There's a modus operandi to how they do things and the stages that they plant. And I know that you do, because obviously you're from the region, you're Syrian, so you know exactly how the Islamic Republic operates, and the stages that they will go through, before something really bad happens. And it's the same for me. I'm very familiar with them, and so I know exactly what they're going to do and how they're trying to kind of turn on the heat. Sorry. But there's something that is quite interesting, is that it had nothing to do with Israel, and I was waiting for someone within the I would say this axis of resistance that Iran has going. I was waiting for when someone would actually mention Israel or Zionism and actually blame this burning of the Quran on Israel, alluding to some kind of a covert operation of some sort. And then I wasn't terribly surprised when Abdelmalek al-Houthi, who's the leader of the Houthi movement in Yemen, who's a proxy of Iran essentially, came out in a speech, and again it wasn't picked up by the media, blaming the Zionist entity, as he calls Israel, for the burning of the Quran, saying that it was a conspiracy against Muslims in Europe, and that Muslim countries around the world should gather around the Islamic Republic and fight for their rights and fight jihad. And I was thinking, well, there you go. So that's why I don't think I'm too far off when I said that, Iran had something to do with staging the burning of the Quran in the first place, to then justify that kind of language and trying to fan tensions and anger people enough that they would rally around the leadership, because the leadership in Iran is offering a solution to what now people believe is an Islamophobic problem, that there is an issue in Sweden.
It didn't start with Abdul Malik al-Houthi. It started with Khomeini, or sorry, with Khamenei. Khamenei was the first one who mentioned.
Was it?
Yes, and he accused Sweden of. He accused Sweden of preparing for war on the Muslim world. He said that.
Did he mention Israel though? Because that's
yes, he mentioned.
Oh, yeah. Did he? Okay, well then my bad.
And he said it's the Zionist and it's the Zionist intelligence. And then Hassan Nasrallah the next day, as far as I remember, also mentioned Israel and mentioned Mossad, which is very interesting. It reminds me of that intelligence officer in Damascus who told me why I was working with a journalist from the Netherlands. And I said, what's the problem with that? The guy came into Syria with a legal visa, and he said he might be a CIA agent. And I couldn't.
So, I think it's a global paranoia in the Middle East. Anyone with a Western passport, if you're not Mossad, you're going to be CIA. If you're not CIA, you're going to be something else. There's an obsession with intelligence services, and I'm not saying that intelligence services don't operate in the Middle East. Of course they do. But I think there's a lot of drama attached to, the notion of foreign countries gathering intelligence on other countries. I mean, they gather intelligence on friendly countries. So it would make sense for them to operate, in the Middle East where they have strategic interests. But I mean, beside the point, but it's not always nefarious. I mean, sometimes people are just there because, they want to know what's going on. And it's as simple as that.
But the problem is, I think it's the fault of the US. It's all those Hollywood films that are portraying.
The Bourne Identity just ruined it for everybody else. But it's, and sometimes, I mean, look, to some extent, you could argue that journalists, for example, are doing, some form of intelligence gathering. But again, it's, to educate the public and actually, force certain conversations. So it's not like the point of what I'm saying is that it's not always, for bad reasons, and sometimes
of course not. I mean, it's part of the communication between mm-hmm. nations and countries. However, remember that in countries like in the Middle East, the word intelligence, the word mukhabarat, is associated with something really terrible. It's associated with Stasi, even though we don't know a lot about Stasi and we don't speak German and we have not been studying the Holocaust in our at schools. Unless you read about the Holocaust yourself, you will never be taught at school about that. You will read books like the book of Hitler. I forgot the name of it. You will find it in the streets of Damascus, or in the streets of Cairo, or in the streets of many Arab and Muslim countries, just for $2 or $3 in the language that you want. You will read the protocols of Zion.
The protocol of Zion. We know it to be. I mean, I'm not going to get into it, but it's a fake. Everyone knows it's a fake. It's a ridiculous document. But I mean, if people want to read it, I mean, they're free to. Why not?
But the problem is, I have to I mean, at least once or twice a week, I should talk to an Arab or a Syrian or a Muslim about the Protocols of Zion being a fake book that was written by is it Russia, or is it?
It was Soviet Russia. Yeah. It was Soviet Russia. Yeah. Well, they were trying to, to find a way. How could we delegitimize Judaism and the Jews in general? There you go.
But you will see it in mosques in Damascus. In mosques, people citing, or sheikhs citing that in mosques in many Arab and Muslim countries, stating them as a fact. On the other hand, you will see the governments, those governments, those dictatorships. Not
Hang on, let me close the window because there's some noise.
Sure.
1 second. There you go. So sorry about that.
Sure. And at the same time, you will see those regimes not objecting once against those imams and sheikhs speaking, and even some intellectuals appearing on television and speaking about the such rubbish as facts, even though everybody knows, and it's a fact, and it was documented that mosque leaders in Syria are picked up, hand-picked by the regime, by the intelligence. Even the cleaner of the mosque is someone who has been handpicked by the Syrian intelligence. They have to observe those who come to the mosque because they see the mosque as a threat. And indeed, it was a threat against the regime because lots of protests went out of the mosques in 2011 because it was the only place left for them to gather and organize, whether you like it or not. So it has those pros and cons of unfortunately spreading anti-Semitism on the one hand, and at the same time spreading or organizing that anger against the regime. And the regime would not educate the people about anti-Semitism, because if you start reading about the Holocaust, you will understand that people are equal. You will start with oppression. You will start with spreading a conspiracy theory, and you will end up burning people alive. We have a president in Syria who denies the Holocaust. He denied the Holocaust twice on television, once with Charlie Rose, by the way. So I bear all of those anti-Semitic, criminal, Nazi ideas from that fascist regime, or from that state that is controlled by that fascist regime, into Europe, and then seeing, well, I did not turn the page because they are here, or we are here, and we want to live a proper life, but we are surprised with someone who is burning our holy book, whether I believe it or in it or not, whether I'm religious or not. Someone who is attacking me in some way, and he is not a Swede, or he is not a Dane, or he is a militiaman. He is a soldier of Ayatollah Khamenei, or soldier of Hassan Nasrallah.
Why do you think Sweden? Because this is a question that no one has asked so far, and I was wondering, because Sweden has, I mean, of my knowledge, a pretty good track record when it comes to tolerance. Even immigration, asylum, it has been, of my knowledge, again, a very welcoming country. So I don't quite understand, like, why try to crack into Sweden? Why not Paris, for example, where Islamophobia is a real problem? Or even, I would say, in the UK, where you've had some kind of social unrest lately around certain, minorities or communities, religious communities living side by side. Tensions have, existed. So Sweden is not a country that, I mean, when you mention the word Sweden, I'm not thinking automatically, sectarianism or social unrest. I'm thinking a society that is very tolerant, very accepting, multicultural. Is not something you wouldn't expect, that kind of display of hatred and violence in a country like Sweden.
I think it is because Sweden was a welcoming country. This is the problematic issue with Sweden. Sweden is receiving anybody who needs protection, regardless of their background and color and ethnicity and so on. I'm not sure. I don't know how much they dig into the CV of everyone, so to say, security-wise. I'm talking here. I don't know if I hope they are, or it is said that they are now revising the file of Silwan Momika. So I think a country like, if a country like Iran, or if a regime like Iran wants to invest in hatred in Europe, It should be a country like Sweden, because Sweden doesn't have a history of mukhabarat and intelligence that is oppressing the people and persecuting them for what they believe and searching into their minds. You should think the same way as the state thinks, and you should wait for orders from the media, and you should wait for orders from the supreme leader of Sweden. It's a free country, it's a democracy, you can do whatever you want. Sweden doesn't allow or doesn't give permission to burning books. Sweden gives permission to freedom of speech or protesting freely, because it's in the constitution, and the logic says a respectable country respects its constitution. So agents such as Momika or people like Momika take advantage the advantage of being in a free country in order to express their own opinion and say, well, I'm not spreading hatred against Muslims. I am just directing my hatred against the Quran. And in my opinion, Sweden was naive in this point, because they didn't see where it was leading them to. I understand that Sweden, officially speaking, is not giving a permission to burn the Quran. It's giving a permission for a protest. But at the same time, they know that the Swedish police knows that this will not end well. There are lots of powers that will, or lots of sides that will benefit from this, and it's not in the benefit of Sweden. Many times they have they abstained from giving a permission for a protest to Baludan and to Momika, but again, they are ruled by law. It's a country of law. It's not and they simply respect their law. And even the prime minister or the king or anybody in this country, they are all under the law. They don't use the law for their own benefit. And it's not how to say. Even though it has the Quran has been burned in Sweden since 2016, the first guy who burned the Quran, as far as I remember, is an Egyptian guy, by the way. And he burned the Quran, and he said on video that he is burning the Quran because he wanted a residency in Sweden. So Sweden, his name is Omar Makram. I mentioned him in my article. And then Baludan came. It's all for political reasons. And then you have now a militia person who is doing it. He says, because of freedom of speech, and he presents himself as an atheist, so you can't criticize him with written texts. And you would say, well, you are a Christian, then someone will tell him, I will burn the Bible or something like that. So he just tries to be as manipulative as he could. And but Iran comes here, and Iran sees this as an opportunity in order to intervene into Sweden, because there is a security file between both countries. Iran is very unhappy with Sweden receiving lots of Iranian opposition for many decades, and for allowing them and giving them the floor to express their opinions freely, and protect them and give them Swedish residency when they, according to law and regulations. And that is not at all accepted in Sweden, in a country like Iran.
I think you put your finger on it. I think it's particularly interesting to me because, as you know, I've talked a lot about how the Islamic Republic has mapped out the Jewish diaspora in view of targeting, businesses, religious leaders, head of NGOs, things like this, to try to disrupt what they view as Israel, I would say, representative abroad. A lot of the time, the diaspora, even though it's not by choice, somewhat acts as an extension of Israel. For various reasons, because you could be, being Jewish means that you have ties to Israel. You don't have to have a passport, but we feel, it's still home, and so there's there's a relationship there. So people formulate it in different ways. But there is something that is definitely exists, and Israel feels responsibility when it comes to its Jewish diaspora for obvious reasons, culturally speaking, anyway. And I think that one of the goal that the Islamic Republic was trying to achieve was to make countries such as the UK, France, the US, Germany, feel uncomfortable and uneasy about hosting a Jewish community within its borders by accelerating the level of attacks and forcing, obviously, the authorities to protect this community and to make people feel uncomfortable. So the Jewish community to feel at risk, and also for the whole of society to feel, what is it that you have done, you Jews, to warrant that kind of attack against you, and somewhat to put the Jewish community in isolation and to feel that they have become a threat because they are a threat to someone and that they've been somewhat criminalized. And I feel that this is something that Iran is trying to do in Sweden, that by forcing Sweden to take a position of defense, for the foreign, I would say not foreign agents. This is a wrong word. To have people who run away, asylum seekers. There you go. People, refugees who came, run away from Syria, run away from Lebanon, run away from Yemen, run away from countless countries like Iran, and trying to find a place in Sweden to find their voice, to express their opposition to the Islamic Republic and its proxies, to put them on the back foot of everything by forcing Sweden to maybe harden its tone or maybe close its borders by fear of repercussion at home and a willingness to protect their own people from harm that the Islamic Republic would commandeer and fund through its proxies. I think there's an agenda like this at play. And again, I think we're missing the mark because a lot of the time we don't pay attention to the modus operandi and the willingness that Iran has to disrupt its enemies before it can actually break in. This is something that it has done systematically, but because we haven't studied it, at least not close enough, we can't pick up on the little crumbs that the regime is leaving, and we can't see what is to come because of it.
I totally agree, and I think it will keep going like this. If you remember, in August 2022, there was a Shia Islamist who stabbed Salman Rushdie.
Yes, I'm glad that you mentioned this because that's exactly the same thing. Yes,
it's and the fatwa that was issued by the supreme leader of Iran, the late one.
We never read the book, by the way.
We
never read the book.
No.
Which is, I mean, look, it's one thing to be banning a book and issue a fatwa for it, which I think is ridiculous and is taking things overboard. But he never read it, and it was a novel. It's a fiction. It's a work of fiction. It's something that he was free to write, and people may love the book, hate the book, don't have an opinion about the book, but it's a book. It's just a book.
But it doesn't matter. Whether it's a book or a picture or a cartoon, it's a pretext to intervene into everyone's affairs. And the Iranian revolution is one of its aims is to spread the revolution. It is in their ideology to spread the revolution. And they have been spreading it. They spread it into Iraq, and now they are spreading it into Syria. They've spread it in Yemen and Lebanon, and now they want to move to the West as soon as they can. Why? Because
I think they have done that for over a decade now. It's been slow. It's a slow burn, but it is happening by virtue of immigration. And this is not me criticizing immigration. Immigration is a strength for any country. But the problem that we have is because, again, we haven't addressed what you're talking about, which is this export of this ideology, this violent ideology. We haven't addressed the problem that what do we do to make sure that those people who are coming into the West have not been indoctrinated, and if they have been, how do we help them get out of it?
At the same time as well, I'm just mentioning examples of the infiltration of Iran into Western community, into Western societies. Into Sweden, for instance, I should say in November last year or December last year, two men who are two Iranian-born brothers were brought to court in Sweden for being accused of spying for Russia, and they were working at the top positions, or one of them was working at the top positions in the Swedish intelligence forces, SEPO, which is, yes, it is Russia, I understand, but I can't deny the fact that we are talking about two Iranian-born brothers. Were they only passing information to Russia, or did they pass information to Iran? This is a very big question.
Well, the two work together anyway. So yeah. I mean, not on all levels, but you know as well as I do that for over. I mean, I would say ever since Putin came into power, and he has employed the help of Alexander Dugin as his chief propagandist. By virtue of the friendship that Alexander had with Nader Talebzadeh, who was the chief propagandist of the Islamic Republic of Iran, we know that the two countries have had exchanges and worked together whenever their interests aligned. And as of today, as of right now, as of yesterday, and a few years ago, their interests align quite a lot.
But as you can see, my point is that Iran is successfully poisoning the environment, so to say, or the ecosystem in the West by impeding its elements. Why would I? I mean, they are trying to spread the paranoia. They are trying to spread the scariness from just someone who is an Iranian. So by stabbing Salman Rushdie, by someone who is a pro-Hezbollah or pro-Iran, I don't know if he's a member of Hezbollah, why would I go to attend a lecture by Salman Rushdie, or why would not be worried on that?
Exactly.
And here I think Sweden is aware, quite aware of, even though it is under now real direct threat from Al-Qaeda, for instance. Al-Qaeda recently has issued a statement mentioning Sweden and mentioning the burning of the Quran. And what a coincidence that Al-Qaeda and Iran are agreeing on the same thing. What a coincidence that Al-Qaeda has never attacked Iran.
Well, there's a lot more than this.
ISIS has never.
I'm actually writing. I'm working on a report that's going to be published hopefully soon on ACLS, and I'm actually looking at. There's a convergence when it comes to Al Qaeda and the Islamic Republic of Iran. It's happening in Yemen with the Houthis. The Houthis have furnished Al Qaeda with drones to attack the STC, which is the Southern Movement in Yemen, and the Southern Movement is in alliance with the UAE and of course Saudi Arabia. So that means that this agreement of non-aggression that Tehran just signed with Riyadh has been violated via proxies, but still violated. The leader, the new, I don't know if he's called an emir or a caliph of Al Qaeda, has residence in Iran. He lives in Tehran.
Interesting.
I'll send you the link to the report. It is quite interesting because again, it tells me that there is an alliance that this whole Sunni Shia divide that Iran has sold to the world doesn't actually exist. There's a blurring of the line. Sectarianism is only serves a purpose, and it's the purpose of fascists. In that communities would feel that they are enemies of another by virtue of their religious differences, and this is something that's so discord and violence, and that allows fascists to rule a lot easier. They love to pit people against people rather than have them stand together against the fascist enemy themselves. So we know that to be true. But I think it's interesting to see that now Al Qaeda is coming out and threatening actually Sweden. And I think that if we're not careful, we might see a resurgence in violence. Maybe not terrorist attack as we have known them in the past, but I think it's going to be very targeted attacks meant to sow unrest and fear across the population. And it's going to prevent any given country to act or react violently against that act of terror, because it's going to be too small for them to want to directly hold, I would say the criminals into contempt, or just tell them that we're going to do something against those foreign powers fanning those tensions, because it's not going to be enough of a threat for them to decide, oh well, let's go and let's play regime change once again. I think that Iran is playing what I call is the boiling of the frog theory. They're doing just enough to achieve their goals, but never enough to force any given government to react violently and to use the military option to stop them. And I think it's look, we have about 2 minutes left on the clock. I want to hear your thoughts on, or at least advice. What do you think Sweden should do? And what advice would you give Western capitals, or even people, in general? Like, what can they do to protect themselves, defend themselves, and what not to fall into in terms of the thinking, and not to become agent of the regime, if not by direct association, in playing into the rule book of violence and fascism. What do we do, and what we shouldn't do? You tell me.
I think, first of all, we shouldn't be scared. We should be really brave, but at the same time very smart, and try to find allies in the region. Countries like Saudi Arabia, like Egypt, Arab and Muslim countries who are trying to find a common ground with the West by communication, by allying forces together against such fascist regimes. I totally understand that that a country like Saudi Arabia is not a perfect state, but at least
no country is. Yeah. People need to get over themselves. There is no perfect country.
But at least Saudi Arabia is not burning and is not bombing embassies. It's not assassinating, and it's not assassinating diplomats.
I agree.
What Sweden has been doing recently is communicating with its own people, being transparent with its own people, saying we are under threat from Al-Qaeda and Iran. However, we should continue living life normally, and that is what I think we should all do. We shouldn't let the bulliers do what they want, and we should be brave, simply, and we should educate ourselves and our children more, mainly about the Holocaust, mainly about freedom of speech, mainly about democracy, and mainly about tolerance. And we should be smarter when it comes to, so to say, receiving people from the Middle East in the West in general. I'm not saying we should not. Of course we should. I understand that those people coming from the Middle East specifically are fleeing such terrible circumstances. I still have family there. I wish I could bring them to Europe, but we should be smarter than that, and we should be more aware of that. And it's not only the state that should be digging into that. We journalists and investigative journalists and academians should be helping in that as well. And mainly those who speak Arabic, because we understand that most of the propaganda is in Arabic, unfortunately.
I agree. I'm going to leave it at that. Thank you so much, Mohammed, for agreeing to this interview. I would again encourage everyone to go and read your work. I will put the link into the video. It's been a pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much. You're one of the few people who actually gets it. Thank you for sharing your thoughts with me. And thank you for reaching out on Twitter. I'm so glad that you did. And I hope that we can continue to stay in touch, to share each other's work. And I would love to host you again soon.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.